Laudetur Jesus Christus. What a great joy it is to gather with all of you this evening for this beautiful, sacred, holy liturgy. This is a first for me, certainly since becoming the new Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Portland, to celebrate my first pontifical high Mass, solemn Mass, here in the Archdiocese. And quite honestly, this is only the fourth time that I've had the privilege to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, what we refer to as the extraordinary form, as a bishop in the pontifical way. In fact, the very first time that I had the privilege of celebrating this sacred liturgy in the pontifical high Mass form was in Denton, Nebraska, with the priestly fraternity of St. Peter, at which ceremony I ordained this holy priest a deacon. So it is a great joy for me to have Father Vreeland join us here. He is a member of the priestly fraternity of St. Peter, currently stationed in Seattle, but we've maintained some contact since he was assigned here to the Northwest. And I would just like to reflect very briefly with all of you this evening about the importance of what we are doing here tonight and the importance of this liturgy in the life of the Church, not in the life of the Church past, but even in the life of the Church today. Thanks be to God, our Holy Father, the Pope Emeritus, Pope Benedict XVI, issued his wonderful letter to the Church, motu proprio, Summorum Pontificum. In that letter, Pope Benedict XVI opened up to the Church once again a wider and freer use of the preconciliar form of the sacred liturgy. Certainly, by the time Pope Benedict issued Summorum Pontificum, there had been a lot of relaxation in the allowing for the use of this usus antiquor, the ancient use of the liturgy. But that letter, Summorum Pontificum, really in many ways broke down all barriers to celebrating freely this form of the sacred liturgy, what we call the extraordinary form. Some refer to this as the traditional Latin Mass. Some refer to it as the preconciliar liturgy, the Tridentine liturgy. Whatever name it goes by, it is alive and well in the Church. Praise God. And thank you, Pope Benedict XVI. But why? Why did Pope Benedict allow for this wider use of this liturgy that you are experiencing here tonight? And what you're experiencing here tonight, let me make it very clear, is the most solemn form of this liturgy. The pontifical liturgy celebrated by the bishop, especially by the bishop in his own diocese, is the highest form of the liturgy. And every other celebration of the Holy Mass derives from this liturgy. And in the usus antiquor, in the former rite, the Mass could be celebrated in the most simple way, what we call the low Mass, even a private low Mass. But the private low Mass, sort of the lowest way of celebrating this Mass, still is a participation and takes its lead, its example from this liturgy, the solemn pontifical liturgy, the liturgy celebrated by the high priest. But why is this so important? Why did Pope Benedict see that this was necessary to keep alive in the Church? Well, in his letter, and in the explanatory note and letter that went with Summorum Pontificum, he made it very clear. His first reason for allowing a greater and freer use of this solemn liturgy is as a way of extending his pastoral care and concern for those Catholics who remain very much attached to the former rites. It was a great pastoral, loving extension of a hand of mercy toward them, to allow those who appreciate and who are deeply attached to this form to be able to experience and celebrate it freely, without barriers. And so a great, great outreach. And even, quite honestly, I think to those who are no longer part of the full communion of the Catholic Church, but who have separated themselves in some way and find themselves in a very unique canonical situation, but who no longer have that full communion with the Church, to extend a hand of friendship to them as well. So certainly that's true, although what's always amazing to me is when I see congregations gather to celebrate this sacred liturgy, I'm always amazed at how many young people are present. Maybe not so many here tonight, but we have a lot of young people here tonight. And young people who experience this liturgy are amazed. And that's the second reason why Pope Benedict allowed for this greater use of this Mass. He says that we must remain in very close communion with our past. Pope Benedict was one who spoke very stridently about the need for a hermeneutic, he calls it, of continuity, a way of interpreting the reforms called for by the Second Vatican Council in continuity with the Church's past. He says there can be no rupture. There can be no rupture. We cannot go from something that was to something that is completely new and different. He said that would be a hermeneutic, a way of interpreting the council and the called for reforms in a way of rupture with the past, as if somehow everything sort of was reset at the Second Vatican Council and everything began anew at the Second Vatican Council. He says, no, this is the wrong way to interpret the council, the wrong way to interpret all of the teaching of the Second Vatican Council, including her teaching on the reform of the sacred liturgy. No, he says, we must have a hermeneutic, a way of interpreting that is in complete and utter continuity with the past. And so as we look at liturgical reform, it must be seen as an organic development from that which has gone before. It has to be clearly seen and experienced as not a rupture, as not something new, but as a very readable, a very understandable, a very obvious even, organic outgrowth of what has gone before. That's continuity. And that's why I think Pope Benedict wanted this liturgy to still exist and be present in the Church. Because this liturgy then becomes, if you will, the model against which we measure all liturgical reform. It becomes the exemplar for the reform. When we look at what needs to be reformed in the sacred liturgy, this is the liturgy we start with. And then we reform from this liturgy as the exemplar. Why would he think he needed to do that so many decades after the council? Well, I think he felt very obviously that there had been some rupture in some places and in some ways. I can tell you, and I don't want to scandalize these young people here tonight. You're looking at this beautiful liturgy tonight with all of its solemnity, with all of its precision, with all of its beauty, with all of its pageantry in a sense, and with the beautiful chant which is meant to accompany this liturgy. And you look at this and you say, how did we get to some of the abuses that we have experienced since the Second Vatican Council? I can remember in the mid-1970s. Now think of that. That's probably about 10 years after the Church stopped celebrating in this way. And I was a high school student attending a campus ministry mass at the university, sitting around a coffee table with a basket with a napkin in it and with bread in it and a ceramic pottery chalice, the priest sitting with us with nothing on but a stole, ad-libbing the Mass. How did we go in 10 years from this beautiful liturgy to such abuses? And sadly to say, maybe not in that extreme, don't tell me if it is, but those days are not over. And we need to continue to look at the sacred liturgy. And this is what I think Pope Benedict was trying to get us to do. Pope Benedict coined a phrase, and many of you have heard it. He said what was needed in the sacred liturgy was a reform of the reform. A reform of the reform. A reform of the reform that took place in the wake of the Second Vatican Council. That somehow the reform had gone off track and needed to be reconnected, if you will, with the Church's past, with her tradition, with the beauty of this. This liturgy is ancient. Ancient. There are prayers that we are praying in this liturgy tonight that are ancient, that go back to the earliest centuries of the Church. Our way of celebrating tonight is a way of celebrating from antiquity. You know, Pope Benedict said in Summorum Pontificum, that which at one time in the history of the Church was considered beautiful and sacred cannot be suddenly not sacred, but is good for us too, he said. And I think as we take a good hard look at the reform of the liturgy in our own day, we need this liturgy as the touchstone, as the measure of what true reform would look like. And there are some who will always be attached specifically to this form. And praise God, it's wonderful. We're a big church. But even in the ordinary form, where I believe continued reform is needed, we have to look to our tradition. We have to root that reform in our tradition, in the sacredness of this liturgy.